Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning,
A superstar from Ogun State.
That's me.
The gateway to Nigeria.
Look at that. Look at that.
Adefemi, congratulations. Do you know that the governor of Ogun State, Prince Dapabiodun, sent her a commendation letter for her 35th birthday?
That's why I say she's a superstar.
Yes, he also sent one to Dr. Abati himself. He's being modest.
Excellent.
We're in such good company here.
Well done.
Thank you.
We're the gateway.
Yes.
We always shine.
We celebrate you and very well deserved. I mean, nobody can contest that. Nobody can begin to say that who made this recommendation.
Exactly. We've earned our place on that list, right? Good morning to you all.
And if I may rub it in, she's a Nieman Fellow.
Yes, exactly.
We don't have too many of her type in this country.
What's all of this? You guys are making my head swell. My goodness gracious. Good morning. You know, on the first of the month, when I was in school, we would say pinch punch is the first of the month. You literally pinch someone, give them a punch. I don't think they do that in Nigeria. I'm trying to be... You don't want to offend anybody.
You can teach us something new, so that's great.
Well, pinch punch is the first of the month. Good morning to you viewers. Let me tell you what is happening around the world. Well, ask and ye shall receive. President Tinubu has released the names of 33 more ambassadorial nominees. Now, this takes the total number of nominees so far to 35. Now, the group comprises roughly of half Korean ambassadors and half non-Korean ambassadors. I think we're looking at 15 Korean ambassadors and 17 non-Korea. Certain names, though, have ruffled feathers, including former presidential advisor and staunch Tinubu critic, Rino Omokri. You've got the former aviation minister who's been accused of domestic violence and domestic abuse, Femi Fani-Kayode, as well as the daughter of a sitting senator, a current senator, and two former governors' wives, namely Erelu Angela Adebayo of Ekiti and Fatima Florence Ajimobi of Oyo State. Now, all 35 nominees have to be and have already been referred to the Senate for screening. So, still an ongoing process, and I can imagine that there's still more names that will come down the line. Now, former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan says what happened in Guinea-Bissau last week was not a coup. Rather, he calls it a ceremonial coup. Now, upon his safe return to Nigeria, the former president met with the current president, Tinubu, at the presidential villa, where the two of them shared, Goodluck Jonathan shared his experience as an election observer, only to find himself trapped in a country after devolving from a democracy to a military despot. Now, it was a joint effort from the Tinubu presidency and the Ivorian government which facilitated Jonathan's safe return to Nigeria. And after meeting the president, he did answer a question from our very own Yolanda Roberts about the coup. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I would say maybe it was a ceremonial coup. Because for two things, it is the President Balo, that announced the coup. Before later, a military man came up to address the world that they were in charge of everywhere. Then Mbalo has already announced the coup, which is strange. Not only announcing the coup, but Mbalo, while the coup took place, was using his phone and addressing media organizations across the world that he has been arrested. I'm a Nigerian close to 70, and I know how they keep heads of state when a coup takes place. Recently, I was a mediator in Mali, an ECOWAS mediator in Mali, and within that period, we had a military coup. Military don't take over government, and the sitting president that they overthrown will be allowed to be addressing press conferences and announcing that he has been arrested. Why does this happen?
Where does this thing happen? That was his question. Well, the deposed president himself, Umaru Sissoco Umbalu, is now in the Congolese capital of Brazzaville. Now, as we reported in the World Brief last week, after he was seeking refuge in the Senegalese capital, Dakar, Umbalu would then be moving swiftly on to the Congo, where, according to his chief of staff, he currently is. Now, a reminder that last Wednesday, military officers announced that they had taken full control of Guinea-Bissau. This was ahead of the release of provisional presidential election results, which of course haven't happened yet. Now, the true motives for the coup remain unclear. There's been speculation, there have been conspiracy theories circulating, including that it was carried out with Mbalu's blessing. We'll keep our eyes and ears on that story. Now, moving on now to the Middle East. And in an Israeli drone attack, 2 young brothers were killed on Saturday. They were aged just 10 and 12 years old. Their names were Fadi and Goma Abu Asi. Now, they were gathering firewood, their family say, east of Khan Yunis to help their wheelchair-bound father with firewood, essentially. Now, the incident adds to the rising civilian death toll since the October 10th ceasefire, with over 350 Palestinians killed in Gaza during the truce period. Now, in the aftermath of this, Israel released this statement. Let's take a listen. Well, I'll read it out to you, essentially. What it said was, earlier today, this was on Saturday, IDF troops identified 2 suspects who crossed the yellow line, conducted suspicious activities on the ground, and approached IDF troops operating in the southern Gaza Strip, posing an immediate threat to them. Following their identification, the IAF eliminated the suspects in order to remove the threat. That's an IDF spokesperson. A reminder that the alleged suspects were 10 and 12-year-old boys collecting firewood for their wheelchair-bound father. Very, very unfortunate. Staying in Israel. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has formally asked the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, to give him a presidential pardon to halt his 6-year corruption trial, which includes charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Now, in a brief video statement and a detailed 111-page letter from his lawyers, Netanyahu argued that the ongoing legal proceedings are deepening societal rifts in Israel and impeding his ability to govern during a period of intense security challenges. He's also emphasized that the request is made in the national interest and does not include an admission of guilt. Now, the pardon request does follow a recent letter from US President Donald Trump urging the president to grant clemency. Very interesting stories in the World Brief there. We'll be coming over to my wonderful colleagues for their thoughts, but first, let's incorporate the newspapers. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day leads this morning with news that the Dangote refinery will supply 1.5 billion litres of petrol in December and another 1.5 billion litres in January. This is after an NMDPRA report showed that it delivered only about half of its earlier projections. Dangote says that the refinery now produces up to 45 million litres daily, will supply 50 litres per day from the 1st of December today, and has invited the regulator in order to verify its output. Staying with oil, let's move on to The Punch, because in a similar vein, The Punch does report that the NNPCL is burdened with over 8 trillion naira in crude-backed loans from multiple projects. Servicing these debts requires more than 213,000 barrels of crude per day, plus gas, which is straining Nigeria's export revenue despite a modest 2024 production recovery. To the Daily Independent. Meanwhile, the Daily Independent, there we go, there it is. It is reporting that the NNPCL remitted 11.15 trillion naira to the federal government in the 9 months ending September 2025. This is reflecting its strong revenue contribution despite production challenges. So some good news there. Moving on to the New Telegraph, the paper does report that more state governments are setting up airlines in order to boost connectivity and economic growth. They have all been inspired by IBOM Air's success. With easier aircraft access and stronger financial backing, state-owned carriers aim to stabilize the sector. So good news for what is happening, and kudos to the likes of IBOM Air and Airpeace setting a good example. Now, The Guardian reports that fresh kidnappings, unfortunately, and killings across Kogi, Kano and Kwara have intensified pressure on President Tinubu's national security emergency. The government is ramping up military operations and intelligence. Human rights groups, though, and as well as security experts, they have been calling for decentralized policing, community-based strategies and integrated action in order to curb Nigeria's escalating insecurity. Well, let's move on to the Daily Trust this morning. The Daily Trust looks again at insecurity. You've got bandits attacking churches, roads and communities across Kogi, Sokoto, Kano and Kwara, abducting dozens of people. This includes a pastor, a bride and a traditional ruler, and killing at least one woman as authorities have launched rescue operations. The Daily Sun this morning reports that parents and worshippers in Kontagora Diocese over in Niger State prayed for the safe return of the students and staff who were abducted from St. Mary's Catholic Missionary School in Papuri, calling on President Tinubu and Governor Bago to act swiftly. Meanwhile, also on the front page of the Daily Sun, there is reports that Pastor Tunde Bakare urged the federal government to suspend non-essential gatherings in high-risk areas and boost emergency patrols, citing recent kidnappings in those areas. Let's take a look at our UK papers. The Financial Times is again weighing in on geopolitics. So you've got this more aggressive response to a hybrid war threat coming by Russia. That's what the NATO chiefs are looking at. You can see the picture headline. And the Daily Express this morning does report on calls for Rachel Reeves, who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the United Kingdom, calls for her resignation. More than 40,500 people have signed the Conservatives' Sack Reeves Now petition by Sunday afternoon. That's according to the Daily Express. And still staying on this topic, the Metro this morning, it does lead with accusations that Rachel Reeves lied about the country's finances, especially that black hole narrative when she first came into office. Now, she was asked 3 times in one interview if she misled the public. She said no each time. And she is faced off also with the Conservative Party leader. You can see the two of them, Kemi Badenoch, over the weekend. So a turbulent weekend for her. Let's not forget the Arsenal. Still 5 points clear at the top, just in case you were wondering. Those are your Warbury stories and your newspaper review. Love to hear your thoughts.
All right, thank you so much for that, Adefemi. I think I'm going to stick to African issues today and, continue to focus on Guinea-Bissau and all that's transpiring around Guinea-Bissau. If you remember, last week we had already sort of, given a prelude to the fact that the reports were pointing towards that this was what has now been called a ceremonial coup or a staged coup in many instances, in many narrations. You have from as far as Paul Kagame, to even Ousmane Sonko, who is the Prime Minister of Senegal, also echoing these statements. I mention Ousmane Sonko because after Embalo staged this coup, which it was very obvious that it was staged because no deposed leader grants interviews to international media immediately after being deposed, unless it's the case such as Gabon, where he used his Facebook page or he went to YouTube to go live. So, there was a coup and the person who was said to have been deposed called the media to say, I have been deposed, before being flown away to Senegal. Now, in Senegal, there is a brewing issue that I think we need to keep our eyes on, which is that there's a rift between Diomaye Faye, president, and Ousmane Sonko, prime minister. Now, if you remember, Ousmane Sonko was the people's candidate, and then with all that transpired, he ended up not being on the ballot. Diomaye Faye was allowed to be on the ballot and elected as president, and then did the right thing, or what people felt was the right thing, which is to appoint Ousmane Sonko as his prime minister. Ousmane Sonko was not aware and did not approve of the Senegalese flight or aircraft that had brought Embalo into Senegal, and it deepened this rift. So apparently it is this pushback from Ousmane Sonko that led Embalo to have to move himself to Brazzaville. Now we ask ourselves, what is the state of ECOWAS? My time is up, but this is what we need to ask ourselves. Let's keep an eye on Senegal, but then you also say when these kinds of crises are happening and we're saying ECOWAS, is it Alassane Ouattara that we think is going to come and do the right thing? Now, we've suspended Guinea-Bissau, but we've already seen the past precedents of suspending countries from ECOWAS. It doesn't usually end well, so a lot needs to be done with the regional organization.
Absolutely. Just a few things around Guinea-Bissau, and it's important because we've seen a spate of coups in the West African region here in Africa, and the conversation around how can we prevent some democratic coups has been called, where elections are done and it's not free, it's not fair, it's not credible, and this could also be perhaps a reason why people are calling, because in some quarters in Guinea-Bissau there are mixed reactions. Some people are like, anything that will help to fix our country, even if it's military leaders, and we've seen those sentiments as well in some other countries where the coup has happened. Now, we saw President Goodluck Jonathan there, where he was speaking post his briefing with President Tinubu on what transpired, having led, a delegation to observe the elections in Guinea-Bissau, and he was able to highlight the fact post that he suspected that this was a staged coup. Now, the reason why he could say that, even though he didn't have verifiable evidence to that effect, were some of the signals around or the things that happened before and after. Number one, precedents. In 2019 or previously, the Guinea-Bissau president had actually also said there was a coup where he dissolved the legislature, and since then there's been no legislature, 2022 legislature in Guinea-Bissau. So he's done it before. So number one, precedents. Number two is that the new military ruler and the new appointed prime minister by the military ruler are both said to be close allies of the deposed president. In fact, the vice finance minister, who has now been announced as the prime minister, was his campaign director during the elections. And so how convenient that after the military coup, his own people are the ones in power. And so we then see even another dimension to how, by all means, to stay onto power, to hold on to power, even selling out your own country and the principles of democracy. Yes, we can talk, and the AU has suspended, ECOWAS has also responded. But I think even more than that, there must be a pressure put on the way that elections are run and how leaders emerge on the African continent. Because we keep seeing different ways for them to hold on and be seat-tight leaders. Anyway, whether they are benevolent dictators, as long as it's not a democratic process, the African leaders' voices must rise up at that point. Not when we see a show of, this sham coup that's happened, but even from the point of elections and the way elections are run, and to uphold free, fair, and credible elections on the African continent.
Okay, your departure point on Guinea-Bissau was the statement made by President Jonathan that it looked like a ceremonial coup. And his explanation was simply that he beggars believe that it will be the same president that was deposed that will still have his phone with him and will be granting interviews to international media and announcing that he had been deposed from office. There was something fishy about that. And both President Jonathan and Oumar Sonko, the Prime Minister of Senegal, said precisely the same thing. They also called for the release of the results of the election, which was to have been released on Thursday last week. But a day to that, you had this coup in which the man who was deposed was the main announcer of the coup before Otta Intaha, came on to now say, oh, he's now the president. And then you had a former finance minister and 28 ministers who had worked with Embalo coming together. Now, put it in context. One, I think it's an act of courage on the part of President Jonathan. While the borders had been closed and he was still there, as chairman of the West African Elders Forum, he issued a statement and said, no, this is not a real coup. Go ahead and announce the result. That takes a lot of courage. And I think that President Jonathan should be commended in that regard. Now, the other thing now is what happens next. Embalo is the only man, 53 years old Embalo, after Portugal's independence, 1974. He's the only man who had said, oh, he wanted to be the first Guinea-Bissau president to have 2 consecutive terms. He didn't get that. So the conspiracy theory that you talked about may well be true. And now he went to Senegal. Well, Senegal is just next door. Guinea-Bissau is a sandwich between Senegal and Guinea-Conakry. And then, of course, from there, he's gone now to Republic of Congo, Congo-Brazzaville. I thought maybe he was going to Eastern Congo, but it turned out he went to Congo-Brazzaville, where he probably has friends. But the whole lesson is about the sustenance of democracy in Africa and the need for the results to be released, which is what Oumar Sonko, Prime Minister of Senegal, President Goodluck Jonathan of Nigeria, the United Nations, AU, and ECOWAS are all saying, so that the democratic process can continue. Finally, briefly, since they are saying the time is up, there are so many interesting subjects. On the Dangote story, I think, again, it's a show of confidence for the Dangote refinery to say, look, we're producing about 1.5 billion liters on a monthly basis, and that the midstream and downstream authority, petroleum authority, is welcome to come and see the facilities, inspect the capacity in the spirit of transparency. And that event is supposed to take place today. I hope we will get a follow-up tomorrow in the newspapers about what will happen. But there is a catch there. The Dangote refinery is also saying they expect the NMDPRA to support them in terms of, their operations in the downstream sector. So these are two sides to the story. It's not just Dangote saying we have the capacity. It's also it's a quid pro quo. Yes. And we hope that the Nigeria First policy, that the Dangote refinery insists that is what it is supporting, will also receive the support and encouragement and endorsement of the same Tinubu administration that had preached the Nigeria First policy. Anyway, thank you very much, Adefe.